Hello everyone, my name is Liv, and today I want to talk about my favorite books of 2018. So I'm going to go in the order of the books that I read throughout the year. These are just the books that really captured my attention, affected me in some way, and have become some of my favorite books I've ever read. So let's just get right into it because I'm sure you're eager to find out what are some of my favorite books that I read last year. So one of the first books that I read in 2018 I fell completely in love with, and it is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. The Cruel Prince is a wonderful fantasy novel that I'm very surprised that I fell in love with because I'm a very rare fantasy reader. I hardly ever read fantasy. It takes a lot for me to get impressed, but I just really fell in love with the world that Holly Black created. I really liked how she wrote about fays, and I loved the whole premise of this girl who gets captured by this really strong fae guy and is being forced to live in the fae world where she has to live with fairies and be a human in a very dangerous world. And she also has to deal with this really cruel guy named Carden, and he's just not about her because she's a human and he's a prince. And it's just a very interesting fantasy novel. I feel like it's a hit or miss for people. I know a lot of people really love it and know a lot of people who didn't really like it, but I think I had a lot of fun with this book, and I cannot wait to see what the rest of the series entails because I think it's just a really cool premise. And this is the first novel besides Cassandra Clare that I read about fairies, and I thought it was very interesting and I really liked it. So the next book that I absolutely adored was a novel that just like changed my mood, came into my life at the right moment, and it just really changed me in a way I can't really describe, and it is Call Me By Your Name. And Call Me By Your Name is just a very atmospheric novel that I think really affected me during the winter because I was longing for that summer weather. I was longing for the fun of not having to be in class and being able to relax, and that's what Call Me By Your Name gave me. Call Me By Your Name is a story set in Italy, and this boy Elio lives in this Italian house and he hangs out there every summer, and their family rents out a room to someone new every year. And one year a grad student decides to stay in Italy for the summer and he falls in love with Elio. So there's an age difference. It's just a very atmospheric and beautifully written novel. I really enjoy the fact that there's hardly any dialogue. It's mostly just description and really vivid descriptions, and it just really made me long to go back to Italy, and it just gave me this nostalgic feeling that stayed with me for months, and it just changed my mood and changed how I viewed life. I don't know how to describe it. I just really enjoyed it, and I always still think about it, and it's just a very beautiful novel. So if you have any recommendations of novels kind of similar to Call Me By Your Name, please let me know because I would love to read another book that could just like change my perspective on life. The next book I am sure you have heard me speak about across all social media platforms, and it is A Little Life. A Little Life, I always say, is the saddest book I've ever read. It made me cry in public. It is such a sad novel following these four boys, and this story follows their life from college to when they are like 50, and is showing this one friend in the friend group named Jude, and he has this very dark past, and it delves into his dark past, and it delves into why he is the way he is. It just really impacted me because the characters were so vivid. I felt like I was going through the same situations as them because the prose was so beautiful and the way they were described was so beautiful, and the whole story was very immersive because it's such a long book, so you get really attached to these characters. And it was just such a well-written novel, and now I know why everyone reads on the subway. Now I know why everyone recommends it to people. It's a very important novel that gives you an insight onto a slice of life that people don't talk about often, and I think it just really changed me in a way that made me appreciate literature and the power of it, and how you can write these beautiful stories that will capture your entire soul, and these characters feel real to you because they are so well written. And I absolutely loved A Little Life, and I will always think about it. The next novel is one that I always talk about as well, and it is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I'm just going to pitch it as a Cuban main character in old Hollywood. That's all I'm gonna say about it because that's all I heard before I bought this novel, and it completely changed my life. It's the first novel where I saw Cuban rep, and I appreciate it so much. I appreciate seeing an unlikable woman be the center of a novel, and she just takes what she can get, and she's a very Slytherin type of person, and it's set in old Hollywood. I love old Hollywood, so this was just like the perfect match because the main character mirrored my own personality, and it was also set in one of my favorite parts of history, and that is the Golden Age. So I just really enjoyed this novel. It will always be one of my favorite books ever. ever, and I highly recommend it to every single person because every single person who's read this has loved it. I feel like there's something for everyone in this story, and I feel like nobody can resist Evelyn Hugo. She is an absolute gem, and while she may be unlikable, you still love her in the end, and you still appreciate all that she's been through and all the advice she has to give, and she is actually one of my role models. She's not real, but she's one of my role models because I want to live my life the way Evelyn Hugo lives her life. The next novel is actually a nonfiction novel that I picked up on a whim because Bastille wrote a song about it, and it is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Bastille wrote a song all about this novel, and it is called Four Walls. It's one of my favorite Bastille songs ever, and I highly recommend it. It is the saddest song ever. It'll put you down and put you in a funk, but it's a great song. This book is about these two men who commit a very terrible crime, and they rob this family of 4 people in a house, and they kill every single person in the family. They run away, but they eventually get captured, and these two men go on to death row. And this nonfiction novel kind of reads like a story. It doesn't really read like a nonfiction novel that just throws facts at you because it's very descriptive. It just reads like a fiction story, and it really captured my heart because I always am interested in the prison system. I'm always interested in how horrible it is, and I'm always interested in people on death row because I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot, and I feel like that should be showcased more often because it's a very grueling process. So in a way, while you're reading this novel, you're looking at these two criminals and you're like, wow, they did such a terrible thing. And one quote in this book that left me literally breathless was the fact that these two men killed these 4 people in such a brutal way. And the cop asks Perry Smith, who is one of the criminals, well, how much did you get when you robbed this house? Because you were robbing this house, you were hoping to get thousands upon thousands of dollars, so how much did you get in the end? And they only got $50. And I feel like that moment in the book just like really smacked me in the face, and I was like, wow, like they actually ruined not only that family's life, but they ruined their own lives just for $50 because they thought they were gonna get thousands upon thousands of dollars from this man who owns the house, but turns out he did not have that money in his house. It's just a very complex case, and you can see both sides of the case within this novel, and you feel for both the criminal, but you feel for both the victims. It's a very interesting part in history, and I can definitely see why Bastille wrote a song about it because you just feel very conflicted throughout the whole entire novel, and it just left me breathless. So I got to dip my toes into the nonfiction world while also feeling like I was reading a story, but then I had to step back and realize this actually happened in history, and there's actually a movie about it that I hope to see soon, and it was just a really impactful story that I also still think about because there's so much that's in this story that like can teach you about the prison system and how cruel it is, and it can also teach you about this part in history with this really gruesome crime, and it was just a very interesting story to read. The next book, which is my favorite book of 2018, is no surprise. It is The Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleeton. I am the advocate for this novel. I feel like I'm their own personal marketing team for Next Year in Havana. If you've seen any of my videos recently, you will know that this is one of my favorite novels in the entire world. This is the first time I saw Cuban rep written by a Cuban author in such a nuanced way that made me feel seen. It's such a beautiful novel. I cannot rave about it enough. I will link my books I'm thankful for video because I went into a really big discussion about why this book means so much to me, and I feel like you could see all of that there. But know that this is my favorite book of 2018, and it is set in 2 different time periods. One is during the present and one is during the 50s before the revolution in Cuba. And I feel like that's all you really need to know because both of those point of views interconnect because the 2 main characters are related. It shows 2 very different times in Cuba. If you want to learn more about Cuban history and what it means to be Cuban, or if you're just looking for a very diverse historical fiction, this is a book for you. I want everyone to read this because this is my favorite book ever. And if you want to know how I feel about being a Cuban, read this book because this is basically my entire mind put into a book, and I love it, and I will not stop raving about it. The next book that I loved in 2018 is such a dark novel, and I'm so glad I read it, and it is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. The Silence of the Girls is a really interesting take on the Trojan War because this follows a woman who is in the Greek camps, and she is a Trojan woman, and she is taken as a prisoner, and she is Achilles' prize basically for taking over this one town that she lived in. It just follows her experience in a Greek war camp and how the Trojan War affects Achilles, Patroclus, all those famous Greek figures. And this is just a beautifully dark take on a story that we've heard about for hundreds and thousands of years. And I think it was so cool because we got to see not only a female perspective, but we also got to see a perspective that is full of hate and judgmentalness towards the Greek warriors, because usually we see them as like the conquerors, they're like the heroes of the story, you root for Achilles, but in this story Achilles is like the villain of the story. And I really like the main character's perspective because it's a very different one from what I've read in previous novels about the Trojan War, and it shows the effects of war, and it shows what it's like to be a prisoner in a war camp. I really liked it. I don't know how to explain it. I felt like I just immersed myself completely in this novel, and I just had such a fun time with it. So I always recommend this to people who like The Song of Achilles. I feel like this would be a good novel to read if you love The Song of Achilles, because it's a very different take on Achilles and how he acts. And I feel like it'd be a cool novel to see, to compare and contrast. The next novel I also have been speaking about way too often in all my recent videos, and it is Bella Figura, and it is How to Live, Love, and Eat the Italian Way. I saw this novel in Book Expo, and I saw it and I was like, I want to live like an Italian. So I was like, let me read the self-help novel. This is actually my first self-help novel, and I really enjoyed it because it's not only a self-help novel, it's also a memoir. So I'm going to read the little back blurb of it because this explains what Bella Figura is. Making every aspect of your life as beautiful as it can be, whether in Rome, London, New York, or Vancouver. It is a notion at once romantic and practical. It encompasses everything we do, from what we eat to how we get to work in the morning. And this novel really shifted my perspective in life. It taught me to seek out the beauty in life, and it's taught me to see things in a more positive light, because the way that this author describes her time in Italy is just really life-changing, at least for me, because one, I'm obsessed with Italy. I think it's such a beautiful country and I wish I could go back to it soon. And this memoir follows Camin, and she goes to Italy for a year. She is fed up with her corporate life in London and she needs a break from that all. She needs to shift her perspective in life, shift her routine, and she goes to Italy to live there for a year and write a novel. And while she lives in Italy, she learns how to eat better, she learns how to live her life better, she learns how to become more confident, how to make friends, how to travel, how to appreciate the world around her. So while we get some life advice in this novel, we also get to see how Camin changes over time and how she learns little life lessons that can apply to anyone's life. And it's just a very inspirational novel. I really like how she combined both a self-help novel and a memoir together to create a really cool novel. I had a lot of fun with it. I read it during the summer. I had such a blast reading it because I got to learn little life lessons. I got to learn the little things that Italians do every day to make their life a little bit more beautiful. Just changed how I decided to view life in a more positive way. And I'm really grateful that this book did this to me, and I'm so glad that I read it, and I'm so glad that I dived into memoirs and self-help novels because they're really fun. There are also Italian recipes in each section of this novel that is split into 12 months to follow the entire year that Camin spent in Italy, and it's just a beautiful novel. It makes me want to cook, it makes me want to travel, it makes me want to redecorate my room and become more minimalistic. It's a great novel. If you want to look for a self-help or memoir book, I would definitely recommend this one. The next novel I read is also a nonfiction. I'm getting really into nonfiction. Look at me! And it is Lauren Bacall's By Myself and Then Some. Lauren Bacall is my favorite old Hollywood actress. I think she is the coolest person ever, and I love her so much. She's such a style icon to me. Everything she has stood for and everything she has done done has really inspired me, and I always want to live my life the way Lauren Bacall lived her life. So I was like, I have to read Lauren Bacall's autobiography. And it is basically the story of her whole entire life. It showcases her marriage to Humphrey Bogart. It shows how she was actually very famous on Broadway compared to Hollywood, and it shows all the strife that she's been through, all the deaths that she had to deal with. And reading this novel has helped me learn to appreciate her even more, because the things that she went through, I feel like I can relate to on a completely different level. I feel like when I read this novel, everything that was happening to her was mirroring everything that was happening to me. So I felt very connected to this story, and I would highly recommend the audiobook because Lauren Bacall narrates it. It is an abridged version of the entire story, so it's a little bit shorter and a little bit more compact, but I feel like the impact is still just as great. And hearing Lauren Bacall speak is just so soothing. She has such a soothing voice that feels like anything that she will say will make your life better, and you just feel safe, at least for me. I just love her so much. She's such an inspiration, and learning more about her life and like the things that she went through and how she pushed herself to become successful while she's living in the shadow of Humphrey Bogart, who is the #1 actor of all time. Her story was so eye-opening, and I am so glad that I read it because it walked into my life at the right moment. It really made me feel seen and comforted me in a way, so I'm always grateful that I read this book, and it will always have a special place in my heart. So this is one of my favorite novels of 2018. The next novel that I read is actually an audiobook that I read, but I still have the physical book, and it is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Strange the Dreamer is such a fun fantasy novel. I wasn't a fan of Laini Taylor's other series, Daughter of Smoking Bone, because I felt like it was too dense, but this one is such an atmospheric novel that is so beautifully written, and I don't want to tell you much about the premise because I feel like going into this book without knowing much about it is really fun, because that's what I did with the audiobook. I also thought the audiobook was so well narrated, and it was really fun and immersive. And the way that Laini Taylor creates these worlds and these powers and this magic system is so intricate and like awe-inspiring, and I could never write a fantasy novel like she does. And I really enjoyed it. I can understand why everyone has hyped this book up. It's such a beautifully written fantasy novel, and I would highly recommend it. I had a lot of fun with the audiobook for this. The last two favorite books of 2018 are actually audiobooks, because I've been diving into audiobooks and I love them so much. I made a video all about my audiobook recommendations, so I will link that down below in case you're curious about the books that I love to listen to. So the first book is The Poetics by Elizabeth Acevdeo, and she is such a wonderful writer. I am so glad I discovered her this year because she completely inspires me. Her narration is wonderful. Yes, she narrates her own book. The way she makes her entire novel sound like a giant slam poetry session is so wonderful. She's just a pleasant person to listen to because her voice is smooth like butter. I just am obsessed with the way she speaks. I love the way she emphasizes certain words and how she has like a rhythm to her voice. And her novel is centered around a Dominican girl. She is living in an inner city, and she's just dealing with typical teenage life problems. She's dealing with her strict mother, her absent father, a new crush. She's dealing with wanting to write poetry, but she can't because it's unconventional. She's dealing with how she doesn't feel connected to the church anymore. It's just such a wonderful story that is told in verse, and I really enjoyed it. I feel like the audiobook gives you so much more depth to the story because you get to hear not only the author's narration, but you also get to hear the emphasis and the smooth tone of all these poems running together. And I highly recommend it if you're looking for a great Latinx book because it's wonderful. And the last book of 2018 that I absolutely adored is another Latinx book, and it is Pride. And I adored Pride. Pride I also listened to an audiobook. It is also narrated by Elizabeth Acevdeo. I feel like she should narrate every single novel in the entire world because she is such a wonderful speaker. Pride is an Afro-Latinx retelling of Pride and Prejudice. It is set in Brooklyn, and it is just dealing with casual teenage problems, applying to schools, having crushes. It deals with gentrification in Brooklyn, and I just really enjoyed this novel. I did not expect to love it as much as I did, but because Elizabeth Acevdeo narrates it, she adds so much more emphasis and emotion and beautiful narration to the story, and I just love her voice. I think I have a favorite narrator now, because she's my favorite audiobook narrator. But I had so much fun with Pride. If you're looking for a great Afro-Latinx book, I would highly recommend this one, because this one was such a fun time. I read it in like 2 days. It was just a beautiful novel. Those are all the books that I have loved in 2018. I did not expect to read as many nonfiction books as I did, and I also did not expect to love them as much as I did, and I think that's such a pleasant surprise. I just love collecting all my favorite stories together and telling you all about it, because I just love sharing my love for books with everyone else. So I hope these books perk your interest, and I hope you read them, because they're all amazing. They're all my favorites, so you should read them. And I also just wanted to say thank you for another year on BookTube. You guys are so comforting and like supportive and loving and positive, and I love that about you guys, because you guys are just so sweet to me. And just thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world to me. When you share my video, when you comment on my video, when you like my video, when you subscribe, that means the world to me, because it's showing that you like care about my book recommendations. It shows that you want to see more from me, and I cannot wait to show you more in this year. So those are all my favorite books from 2018. I cannot wait to see what I love in 2019. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your support and love, and I will see you in another video. Okay, bye.